not, in the 19th century, you have a connection between Schopenhauer, and he influences Wagner, and Wagner influences Nietzsche. And in fact, Nietzsche and Wagner were for a while pretty good friends. Schopenhauer's a little early for Nietzsche. I think they may have met each other, but it's when Nietzsche was young and Schopenhauer was old. But this whole idea of the will, which Megan highlighted nicely, is at the core of it. And of course, that's the case for Nietzsche. Nietzsche builds his whole philosophy as well around the idea of will. So this is what Nietzsche got from Schopenhauer. I was just realizing that I had neglected, I was going to queue up a Wagner piece, and I may still try to do it depending on how our time goes, and if not today, I'll try to do it tomorrow. Because it gives you a little flavor for it. Now, you may hear it and think, well, it sounds fine. You have to think about Wagner as up against, say, Baroque music, which would have been the prevailing style at the time. And if you think about the contrast, then it gives you a feel for Wagner's contribution. And really, I feel like Wagner's music is audible Schopenhauer. You know, you hear it. So anyway, we'll try to do that. But let me just add a couple of thoughts to Megan's excellent presentation. There's a little story that comes from the life of Schopenhauer that is just one of those little dark pieces, similar to most of the things in his life, which were not overly uplifting. He got sued by a woman. He lived in a little apartment building. Did you come across this, Megan, in your... Okay. So he lives in this little upstairs apartment. If you can kind of imagine almost a tenement thing, these kind of, old stairs that go up to a little room where he lives, kind of a hovel up there, and that's where he lives. He's not married. He's a lonely, isolated guy and not very happy. And this woman lives a floor below him. And she gets an idea in her head to figure out a way to sue him. And so she goes up and starts banging on his door. And he doesn't want to talk to him. Go away, I'm not buying. And she just keeps banging on the door. Bang, 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 bang. And finally, he opens the door, at which time she falls down the stairs. And claims that he had purposely pushed her down the stairs, which is highly improbable, This is just to show that these guys actually have lives, even though sometimes they're not very happy lives. And so then she sues him for assault, for pushing her down the stairs because of injuries that she sustained, because she knew he was an author and published and got some money. And so she was trying to get her fingers into some of that that he collected every month. And as a matter of fact, she won. And he had to pay her on a monthly basis for the rest of her life. And she happened to live for another 20 years, And then she died. As far as we know, he had nothing to do with her death, but one wonders. When she died, he wrote in his journal the following words. You might want to write these down. You may need them someday. This is in Latin. This is what he wrote. Obit, O-B-I-T, anus, A-N-U-S, comma, obit, anus, comma, abit, onus, A-B-I-T, O-N-U-S. So it's a little play on words in Latin. You pick that up. Abit onus. I'm sorry, said it wrong. Obit anus, abit onus. I know basically the meaning, but I don't do Latin well enough, and I went down and asked Mr. Ingard about this a couple of years ago just to see if he could clarify it, and he confirmed the fundamental meaning. It's very cryptic. But what the basic meaning of it would be. Any Latin buffs in here want to try to construe this little phrase? No? Josiah? Mr. Latin himself?
Mr. Latin.
I only know really one word that's honest once a year.
You know, that was Mr. Ingard first thought that, and it actually has a different meaning here. Yeah, I know. Okay, here it is. Obit, as in obituary, has to do with someone dying, right? Anus is some kind of way of referring to a female. So she died. Only the way it's usually rendered is the old woman died. And then obit is lifted, onus, the burden, as in something being onerous. So, the basic meaning, the old woman is dead, the burden is lifted. And you never know when you might need that, Avery. It's one of those catchy little phrases that might come in handy someday. Or you might want to just tuck that away. Anyway, that was in his journal when he made the last payment to this old woman who had been a plague in his life for some time. All right. Schopenhauer has no noumenal. He is a pessimist. Sometimes you'll hear people say that for Schopenhauer, the will is the noumenal. Megan said that, and that's the way it's generally viewed, and I was wrong with that. For him, there is this thing called the will, and it's the closest he gets to any sort of transcendent or noumenal reality. The problem is that the will is still very much a part of our experience. But you might say the will is part of a greater reality, and so that's where we leave it. He doesn't give any sort of ontological analysis of it. But he does believe will is the inner content, driving force of the universe. Will. So it is some kind of reality. To my knowledge, he never tries to explain it. He doesn't say the will is God or try to give some sort of metaphysical analysis of it. It just is where he starts. That this is somehow or other the inner driving powerful force that carries things along. He says the will has primacy over the intellect. This is something like Hume. Remember Hume's instrumentalism, that our reason is the slave of our passions, Hume would say. Well, something like that here. The will takes primacy over our thought, takes primacy even over being. It is the fundamental reality. Now the question was raised, who raised it? It was a great question. I think it was it you, Ben? The question about art? Yeah, okay. So Megan gave a great answer. I can't improve on it. I just want to reinforce it. Art is a message without words, And again, if we listen to Wagner, hopefully it kind of illustrates the point. You can't really describe will, but you can feel it. And you might see it in art, or you might hear it in music. And the true artist somehow is able to take this which is beyond words and somehow depict it in a way that is meaningful to us, even though we don't exactly know how to wrap words around it. You'll all experience this someday when you fall in love and you're gazing into the eyes of the person with whom you have become so enamored. And you'll say to this loved one, words can't express what I feel toward you. Stephen, the day'll come. I know you find it hard to believe. But a strange thing sweeps through the human heart in these moments. Well, that's kind of the point, you know. Words cannot express. Words cannot convey this deeper reality, but somehow art can. Music can. Poetry can, you know. And so that's kind of what Schopenhauer's onto here. He therefore considered philosophy and logic less important than art. And that is really a significant part of Schopenhauer. He's the first guy that tries to get philosophy out of this sort of dusty classroom, lecture, 3 points kind of experience. He really thinks philosophy is more to be felt than to be thought.
So, did you just say that you would say that philosophy and logic are more than art? Or
no, he's saying that philosophy and logic are less important than art. Okay? And also he would add less important than certain kinds of charitable practices and even certain forms of religious discipline. He kind of puts the whole philosophical experience into a different ballpark. And in the book that Megan mentioned, which is his most important work, The World as Will and Representation, he taught that humans live as objects in this great stream of desire. That's what he means by will. Every one of us in this room is driven by desire. And it carries us along like a leaf on a raging river. We are helpless against it. We cannot resist it. We are carried along by it. And all we can do is express the experience artistically, but there's no sense in which we rise above it, become the masters of it. This is the big difference between Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. For Schopenhauer, we are, in a sense, victims of will. Nietzsche, it's the will to power. You know. And just to help you connect the dots a little bit, the most important propaganda film produced by Hitler, who loved Nietzsche, the title of Hitler's most important propaganda film was, anybody know? I don't know if you watched some of this in 20th century history. You might have, though. I'm planning to show some of it this year to my 20th century history people. Anybody know? It's entitled The Triumph of the Will. See, that's Hitler's title to his propaganda piece. Where did he get that idea? He got it from Nietzsche. Will to power. But Nietzsche got it from Schopenhauer. Only in Schopenhauer, we are victimized by will. Will is not something we exercise for power. Will is something that exercises power over us, and we're just carried along by it. You see the difference? So in a sense, for Schopenhauer, we are passive. For Nietzsche, we're active. But the will is still at the crux for both of them. What he means by will, you can almost make an equation between will and desire. And that's his point. That we are carried along by these passionate desires within us, and there's not much we can do to resist them. But he says we can become somewhat philosophical about it. And so he introduces now a little bit of Buddhism into his philosophy. And Schopenhauer was indeed influenced by Buddhism. And Buddhism has a similar message that, again, emphasizes the place of desire and the influence it has over us. And Buddhism is a religion of trying to sort of rise above or escape the ravaging effects of Desire. Anybody ever study Buddhism? I don't know if that comes up at any point along the way. Is that? All right, well, this is not going to be a detailed treatment of it. But in Buddhism, there are the so-called Four Noble Truths. I want you to know this, and it may serve you well at the same time. Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth in Buddhism, to which Schopenhauer agreed and subscribed, is there is suffering. Schopenhauer himself felt that his life was one great experience of suffering. Every one of you in this room knows something of what it is to suffer. Right now you've got your, thesis coming. And you're all feeling a certain degree of pain, aren't you? Pressure. You're wishing Mr. Gore would just give you a few class periods to work for it, but no. Mr. Gore has his own agenda because he doesn't care that much that you've got thesis coming. I care about you learning Schopenhauer. So there's suffering, and to some degree I'm the one inflicting upon you right now as we speak. And the world is filled with it, and sometimes it can be excruciating and painful, and Schopenhauer felt he knew something of that. Then, the second noble truth of Buddhism is suffering is caused by desire. The reason we suffer is because we desire. Suffering at its heart is always created by the gap between what I'm actually experiencing and what I wish I were experiencing. Think about that. See? The reason I'm experiencing any pain at all in my life right now is because I have the ability to compare my situation as it is right now with the way I wish it were. And my desire creates a gap between reality and wish. And that gap is the suffering gap. If I didn't have some other reality that I could envision, then I wouldn't be comparing my present circumstances to that situation and creating suffering in my life. You know, there's some truth to that. Really. The Apostle Paul has something to say on that. You may recall. What does he say? On the gap, on suffering, on that on the whole concept I'm talking about. What does the Apostle Paul say on a similar theme? Anybody remember? Have any idea what I'm talking about? Paul says, "I've learned in whatsoever state I am, what? Therewith to be what? Content." See, what is contentment? It means I'm willing to accept the way things are right now as the way they ought to be. And that I'm in the best circumstances I can be right now. That this is where God has placed me for my good, and that for me to engage in this sort of wishful idolatry, thinking I wish God were giving me a different circumstance, is indeed creating misery for myself. So Paul, so far, makes a good Buddhist, you know. I hate to say that, and please don't quote me, but nevertheless, you can kind of see that, at least to some degree, Buddha was onto something, and even Schopenhauer was onto something. Now, the two paths part at point 3. These are 4 noble truths. So far, in 2 of them, we'd probably say, yeah, not bad, you know. Now, Buddha gives us the third point, third noble truth, which again was subscribed to by Schopenhauer, and it would be that desire can be eliminated. Desire can be eliminated. Now, I think we might say as Christians, okay, desire can be eliminated. The question is, should it be eliminated? Is that the solution to this problem? In other words, does God call us to a life of no desire? Does Jesus ever say to us in his teaching, okay guys, if you want to really be my disciple, don't desire anything? You know. Does Jesus ever talk that way? No, he actually appeals to our desire a lot. What does it profit a man, he asks. That's a profit motive he's appealing to there. You know, are you going to do something that's good for you, or are you going to do the right thing that's good for you? So at this point I think we can say, well, it's a little parting of the ways. Buddhism, as well as Schopenhauer, said the only solution to this problem we have of being carried along, victimized by these powerful motives, these desires within us that are stronger than we are, the only way is to just detach ourselves from that desire. Not to control it, not to direct it, not to try to turn it into a device to get what I want, but simply to, in a sense, become stoic. Eliminate the desire. Just simply detach myself from it. And that's what Schopenhauer's philosophy is really trying to accomplish. Now, the fourth noble truth in Buddhism is not embraced by Schopenhauer. I'm going to put a little X here to say Schopenhauer agrees on the first three, however, differs on the fourth. The Buddhist fourth point, fourth noble truth, is that in order to eliminate desire, you need to pursue what's called the eightfold path. And then Buddha gives us the eightfold path. And these are disciplines. And as you go through these disciplines for a lifetime, you can eventually get to where you eliminate desire. You know, so that's Buddha's response. I'm not going to bother with that because it's beyond our immediate concern. But for Schopenhauer, instead, he gives us what maybe you could call the twofold path. Right? So he's got the twofold path. I don't think he called it that, but I'll call it that for purposes of our conversation. All right, the twofold path by which desire can be eliminated, okay? According to Schopenhauer, one option, one path, is for you to suffer a loss so extreme that you lose your will to live. You suffer a loss or losses so extreme that you lose your will to live. It's snowing. Maybe which is, of course, Italian for it's snowing. Now, I want you to think about this. I think we can all envision, hopefully none of us have been through an experience like this, but I think we can all envision, and I've met people that I think would fit this description pretty well, who have suffered such staggering losses. You think of, the classic story would be Job. But you've all met people who've just experienced such losses, such painful, agonizing losses, that they almost get to the point that life itself isn't worth the effort. Right to the brink of suicide. They lose the will to live. And I suppose all of us have had pain in our lives sufficient to at least have that thought flash across our minds. Is it worth it? Now, hopefully, in our case, the grace of God kicks in and carries us along, and we don't actually find ourselves seriously in that dark, morose world. But I think we can all envision it. Losses that are so severe and so painful that we just lose the will to live. And he says that's one way that desire can be eliminated, but it's a very painful way to go. Most of us wouldn't wish for that. Usually it's foisted upon us in spite of our desires to escape it. So that's the first path. Schopenhauer felt he came pretty close to that path through a lot of his life. As Megan correctly said, it was a dark, sad, long, lonely life. The second is this: I can become closely, intimately associated with the suffering of others. And thereby detach myself from those desires. And this is where his whole notion of charity, his whole notion of a kind of altruistic, self-sacrificing life comes from. Every year at the church I go to, I kind of see a little hint of this with the kids that go to Tijuana, Mexico. I know some of you have done mission trips like that. Our kids will go down to Tijuana and build houses, right? Anybody ever done kind of a mission trip like that? Something like that? Where you go and it's just it's a week of being very close to people whose life is so incalculably different from yours. And they live in circumstances that you would just find appalling, but then you hang out there for a while and it begins to change your whole view of things. You begin to adjust your desires. These kids will come back, after a week, and of course they've been so close to this radical poverty, building a little tiny house for which the people who receive the key at the end of the week are just incredibly grateful for this little house, tiny little house there. And they sort of come back with a real adjustment of their value systems. And then they look at iPods and flat screen TVs and all of the consumerism of America, and it just kind of has an effect on them. You know what I'm saying? And that's what Schopenhauer says is the other way. We can become so intimately connected to great human suffering, or great human need, that we, again, detach ourselves from our own sense, of these things that we wish we had. So that's his twofold path. It is a sad philosophy. It is not one that gives us a lot of inspiration, but that's the basics of it. I'm just going to give you three kind of final overall points here, summarizing. And I don't think I'll try to hunt down Wagner today, but maybe if you can keep this in your mind, I'll try to start off tomorrow with a little Wagner to illustrate this, please.
Why would you, if the will is equivocated to desire, why would you want to eliminate it? If it's kind of the driving force of our lives, why would you want to not
that's what Nietzsche asked. Okay, you're asking the Nietzschean question to Schopenhauer. For Schopenhauer, the will is like a bully. Okay? It bullies me. It drags me around. It pummels me. It punishes me. It victimizes me. It does all kinds of bad things to me. Nietzsche comes along and says, hey, why not make the will this great source of power in my life? Why not put myself in the driver's seat, as it were, and make the will to power the great reason for my life? And then that's exactly what Nietzsche did. I'm not calling you a Nietzschean, of course, Jordan, you understand. But that was his criticism. That was his whole... They both agree that will is at the center of things. The difference is, what do you do with that? For Schopenhauer, there's nothing you can do except try to get free from it through his twofold path, recognizing these things. For Nietzsche, no, you can take over. You can lasso that thing and become what Nietzsche called the Übermensch. Superman. Not the guy with the cape, of course, and the big letter, the Übermensch. All right, these are the main concluding points here. One, these are point emphases in Schopenhauer, kind of the summary idea. One, man as victim. Man as victim. Yes, right. Or to desire. Schopenhauer is the first philosopher to come along to see man as tossed. We are tossed by forces that are bigger than we are. Notice how important this is. Every philosopher, in a sense, up till Schopenhauer, is trying to give us the mechanism of control. Plato, Aristotle, all these guys, right down to Hume, right down to Kant. They're all trying to say, here's how you can master your life. Here's how you can rise above it and be, some kind of superior being based on my philosophy. That's what they're all selling. They're all peddling something that's supposed to make your life better. Schopenhauer comes up and says, forget it. There's nothing you can do with it. You're just being carried along, and you just better deal with it, because you're never going to rise above it or escape it. Yeah.
How would Schopenhauer describe the situation of people that are very wealthy and have somewhat glamorous lives?
Same thing. He said they are as victimized as everybody else. And to prove it, he'd run you down to Albertsons and show you all the tabloids of all these people who have everything in the world that they want, and they're miserable. They're suicidal. He'd show you Charlie Sheen. He'd show you, he'd show you whatever. It's not hard to demonstrate, is it? I mean, you never look at these People magazine or all of these things of these people who are supposed to be the rich and glamorous and have everything under control, and all you see when you look behind the scenes is misery. Interesting, isn't it? I think so. Schopenhauer would say, hey, that doesn't argue against my case, it makes my case. Secondly, second theme, man as lover. This is an odd and somewhat ironic aspect of Schopenhauer's philosophy. He's the first philosopher in history, really, to give us a thorough treatment of the idea of love. He's actually the first one that made that very famous and important philosophical comment, mere words is what brings us together. No, I'm just kidding, don't He does have, but please understand, when he talks about love, he means something more closely related to what you might call lust. He doesn't have a theory of love that is quite as deep and rich as we would expect to find from a Christian point of view. It's very closely connected to sex, and he views sex and lust and love in that sense as one of the chief forces that drags us along. I think part of the reason is because, he was frustrated in his love life all through the years. He never found anyone that really, wanted to go out with him, and so I think it was, part of what created that unhappy situation. Now, get this. Just get this. I'm going to come back to it. Schopenhauer was in many ways the fundamental inspiration behind Freud. Freud follows Schopenhauer. He especially fixates on this idea of sex and the sexual impulse and the fact that we are victimized by it and forced to try to take control over it. So if you could think about Freud, he has a Hegelian piece on the one hand and Schopenhauer on the other. And Freud is kind of a synthesis of those two. And we'll treat. Is anyone reporting on Freud? Sid's not here to defend himself. Okay, good. All right, last, man as artist. So there's three emphases. Man as victim, man as lover, man as artist. And again, Schopenhauer in some ways is the first guy to give us a really meaningful philosophy of art. He sees art as that expression of the human heart up against these forces that are controlling us. And we really can't say anything about them, but we can artistically express what we're feeling. And probably the one artist who was most consistent in grabbing hold of Schopenhauer's ideas and expressing it artistically was Richard Wagner. And now if I thought a little bit, I would play a little Wagner for you, but we'll have to hold that for tomorrow. All right. Comments, questions about Schopenhauer? I want to just say to you, every year for about the last 5 or 6 years, I've had somebody report on Schopenhauer. Nobody has done it better than Megan did today. That was very good. She got close to the mark. And so kudos to Megan for that.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you, Megan. You're dismissed.